Hey everybody, it's Alicia. Welcome to another episode of Tears at the Table. I'm really excited because we have Callie Logan, who I literally just met tonight, and she reached out to me and she just has such a cool story of her journey of faith and being a writer. And rather than calling her a storyteller, I would actually say she is someone who loves words in all aspects because she's also a teacher. So, Callie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to get to connect with you and make a new friend. And I hope everyone listening feels like they're just hanging out with friends because I sure do. So I'm a history teacher, like you mentioned. I actually did used to teach English, which is kind of funny. Teachers usually wear a lot of hats and we teach a lot of things, even if we don't know what we're teaching sometimes. But it's a gift too. But in my heart, I am a writer and I love sharing stories of God's goodness, stories that include the highs and the lows of life, and being very real and authentic. And I am grateful for the story I've been entrusted with. It's not always been an easy one. I've faced health challenges, I've faced eating disorders, I've faced depression and all kinds of different things. But the one thing that's been constant throughout my life is that I found that God is the nearest friend. He is always present and He is our constant companion. And that is one of my favorite and one of the things I'm most grateful for about faith is just always having Him present with us enduringly.
So tell us a little bit. It sounds like you've had a relationship with Jesus for a very long time. So tell us a little bit about that journey. Like, when did you find him and how has that evolved over time?
As a kid, I was very thankful and it was very fortuitous that I grew up in a Christian home. But there has to come a time, God doesn't have grandkids. So there has to have a time where you as an individual come into a curiosity or a deepening of faith. And for me, curiosity was probably the biggest thing. I would hear my parents talk about God, I would go to church, but I just wanted to know Him more deeply. And so around middle school age, I literally picked up the Bible and I just read the whole thing. And I was like, I just want to get to know God better. And I started praying and developing that friendship and that relationship with the Lord. And it's definitely grown as the years have gone on. And it's been neat to see God's character manifest in different ways, knowing Him as friend, knowing Him as father, knowing Jesus as spouse, all those different things. And you read it, but it's a very different thing to just read it and then actually apply it to your life. And I'm grateful that I've been able to experience that. And I know I've got a lot more to experience too in this lifetime and beyond.
I love that. And I love that your journey is one you don't always hear about of faithfulness. From a similar place of just being faithful to God. I think sometimes that can get overlooked or you can feel ashamed of that almost of like, well, I didn't go do 100 drugs. So I don't have this like crazy testimony, but I think that's a beautiful lesson too. I recently heard something that stuck with me of where it said, you tell a kid, don't touch a stove. What do? They touch the stove. But that's never the intent. If they had listened and didn't touch the stove, they would have never had to experience the burn. And for me, that really spoke to that faith that you have rather than saying, I need to go touch the stove. You're just like, I'm going to listen and steer clear. So it sounds like you have a very close relationship with God and saying, I'm going to follow your ways and I'm going to choose to trust that your way is better. And that's kind of jumping me right into actually what we were talking about before we hit record of just you write books and I noticed on your social media you talked a lot about singleness, especially. And I would love for you to elaborate on what we were talking about earlier, what it's like being a single woman growing up, I'm sure with the expectation and desire for kids and marriage. And it's like, what is that journey for you right now?
I love speaking on this particularly because growing up in the church, there is that expectation. And I think in a weird way, as Christian women, we almost walk into this The expectation, like you buy into this idea that you're going to get an MRS degree when it's really difficult. You start a good plan or not, and you feel confused. And so I like sharing about my journey because I certainly didn't think I would be a couple months shy of 33 and still single. But what I have found is a profound awareness, like I said, of God's presence, but also there's a gift in who you're becoming because it is a wonderful thing and it is a prize thing to have the desire, the pure heart of desire to be a wife. But we are made as women to be so much more than just a wife. We're first and foremost made to be daughters of God. And whether we're a wife or not, we're first and foremost a daughter. And so I think becoming the best daughter possible to him and fulfilling what he's entrusting you with, that timeline, that story, all those different things. So I love inviting people to kind of redefine singleness, maybe challenge some narratives and kind of think outside the box.
I really like that. One of the things I always challenge women on within that arena, you talked about being a daughter. You're not only a daughter of Jesus, but until that time, a lot of people are daughters to a father, or if they don't have a father, there's a pastor in their life or someone like that. And it's like, how are you serving them in that season? I'm not saying you're a servant of a man. I'm saying in order to be a good wife, it's not about finding, for myself, my conviction is it's not about finding a boyfriend and practicing a ton or anything like that. It's like, who are the men in my life right now that God has asked me to steward well? Because what is going to make me a good wife is how have I treated all the men around me right now? How have I honored them? How have I respected them? And how have I become the woman I need to be so that they can be better? And sometimes I think we forget that. Like, we just completely forget that we'll marry one man, but we'll encounter most likely hundreds, if not thousands, of men in our lifetime.
That's such a good point. And that's true. We have that opportunity to be good stewards of the relationships we've been given and help encourage them in their callings. And they say it takes a village to raise a kid, but I think we're all in the kindergarten of
Yeah.
life in comparison to eternity. And so we're all kids learning. And so I love that heart posture that you have of being a good being a good villager, but also being a good steward of those relationships he's given to you.
I appreciate that. And it's just as you brought that up, I always go back to that just working in my own roles, which we didn't elaborate as much in person. But when I'm not running Tirza, just working previously in the pro-life movement. And in Kentucky, abortion is illegal. So now I moved into working in the foster care area, which would be next, is like making sure all these kids have homes. And it's walking into that world, finding if your heart doesn't stay pure, and that applies to waiting on God's timing for a man. If your heart doesn't stay pure towards men, it can become very bitter very fast, especially when you encounter, in my case, thousands of women who have been either abused or abandoned by men. It is very quick and easy to write off an entire gender and be like, why? Why waste your time at that point? But the thing is, we're all God's children, like you said, and we're all learning, growing in kindergarten. And as hard as it is, I'm not saying abuse is right, just to clarify ever, but it's saying we're all daughters and sons, and we all are growing, and we all are becoming.
It's true. And I think there's something to be said too for, as you had said off air, encouraging men to be better and to do better. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity that we can, as women, with our femininity, we can encourage healthy masculinity and encourage them, hey, you're doing great. If you see it, say it. I have a younger brother. He's about 5.5 years younger than me. And I try to look at those things that he's doing well to encourage him in that because I am somebody who I can speak into that. And so when he sees, oh, okay, that is applauded. That's a good way to treat other women. Things like that, and looking at that, even if it's small things like opening the door for you, just hey, I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's chivalry isn't dead.
I love that. I was notorious when I worked in young adults ministry for making all of the guys hold the door, like stopping and standing in front of it until someone opened it and they would learn. And I was like, you're not going to offer because you've been rejected so many times. So let me stand here till you do.
I mean, we're setting the bar low, but we got to start somewhere.
Exactly. Kind of shifting gears as you were talking about a younger brother. What is it like? We have actually not interviewed a teacher before. So, what is it like being a teacher to high schoolers, especially when you're only in your 30s yourself? So, not too much older.
I think one of the wildest things was my first year teaching. I had worked for 2 years out of college. I worked for Apple, and then I started teaching. And so my students, I believe, let's see, I was 24 at the time, about to turn 25. So my students were only about 6 years younger than me. That was wild. That was quite a wild time. And realizing that that's a big pivotal 6 years, but also I think there's a gift of being able to relate to them in some ways because I'm not so far removed from their age that I forget what it's like to be that age. But it's also encouraging them to be better and seeing young women, encouraging them and their self-esteem and who they're growing to be and different things like that, and encouraging the young men in the same way to pick up that sword and to be the man that God called them to be. I'm grateful that I teach for a Christian school, so I'm able to talk about faith and encourage kids, but I try to create and foster an atmosphere where they feel safe and they have the safety to be curious, be unsure and uncertain, but also come in with authenticity so that we can steward and encourage that thriving environment together. And it's healthy. No one feels shut down or ostracized or outcast or anything. That's something I'm really big on.
I love that. And as we're talking, like within that atmosphere, what are the biggest struggles that you see them encounter?
I would say mental health is probably the top one. I have such a heart for that as I myself have struggled with battling depression and anxiety for the better part of my life. But I see it manifest in a different way with them. I think a lot of that was in their early development years going through COVID. I
Yeah.
think incited deeper fear than people are really giving credit to. That something that's quite small, they make it a little bit larger because that's kind of how the pandemic started. They thought it was going to be nothing and then it exploded out of nowhere. And I noticed mental health, I think also too, kids having phones too young can really do some damage. And I do see where there are just, I think the enemy has a plan to discourage young people from thriving and feeling happy. And that breaks my heart so much.
That is very discouraging. And I'm coming from foster care world, so the problems tend to be a little more like severe than an average teenager. But it is a lot of those same battles of mental health. And I would go a step further because the kids I work with and the teens I'm around are they don't have privilege in their life. We get into all those class things. And the thing with it, though, is people tell them that. They're like, don't worry, you won't be able to do it anyways because you're a victim. And they fall into that so easily, and their mental health becomes worse and worse because they truly have just heard over and over again, well, you're a victim.
Yes, it's an identity crisis, really.
What would you say to someone that was out of their teens on how they could encourage a teenager in their life or get to know one?
The biggest thing is listen and be a safe space. And that doesn't mean be a pushover, let everything that they tell you not be met with maybe a word of encouragement or some encouraging redirection when needed. Like, hey, that might not be the best idea. But I think being a safe space that they don't feel judged, regardless of what they're going to tell you. And I think being very transparent. I think children have this, it's almost like with teachers where the kids think the teachers live at the school.
Yeah.
They have this misunderstanding that that is their role and that they have everything figured out. But the truth is, we don't. And that doesn't mean unloading our baggage on them, but it is being transparent, saying, sometimes I really face a lot of depression too. And so I
Mm.
have a heart of compassion for that because I know exactly what that feels like, even though I'm depressed over different circumstances. I understand what that can make you feel like on a daily basis. And I think when they have that position of empathy, they feel less alone, but they also feel safe to maybe open up to you.
I love that, and I agree so much. I am running a magazine and surprisingly introverted, but I have found that has made me someone that's pretty happy to be closed. But it's like you said, I noticed even in my early 20s about transparency and how much people are valuing that in the coming generations of just authenticity on the journey. They're not looking for perfection. They're looking that you can go after something and also struggle and fail as you do it. And that's been a commitment. Whether it's always gone well or not is another story, but it's a commitment to just be transparent of, okay, I have this thing that God's given me to steward this magazine, but it's been a journey and it's something that I've publicly continued to share of like, I failed, leaders have failed, men have failed, women have failed, and I found more friendship when everyone was willing to be authentic over when people were trying to be something they're not or pretend they're already there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also I love collecting stories of those who have they failed or they have had a hard time and how they invited God into the story and how everything changed. And even in US history, there are opportunities to do that. Chuck Colson is one of my favorites. He was one of the main guys of Watergate.
Yeah.
He went to jail because he had a radical transformation with Jesus. And when he actually instituted many of the prison ministries that still exist today,
Yeah.
and his legacy was that of being a man after God's heart, and it was redefined. It wasn't just all of his involvement with Watergate. And I love collecting stories like that to share with the kids because they can see, oh, okay, so just because I did this one bad thing in my life where I was part of this, no matter how monumentous it
Yeah.
seems or it maybe is, saying when you invite God into the story, he can completely rewrite what your ending's going to be.
I love that. And in your collection of stories, one of my favorites is actually an earthly hero of mine that I've had the privilege of working with a time or two. But Abby Johnson and her story is she was a Planned Parenthood social worker. She became a director, the youngest ever. Like, this is a woman who, when she sets her mind to something, she's going to do it. She's going to do it well. She's an incredible person and she's driven. And so she did. The thing is, as a Christian, she decided to work for Planned Parenthood and even against her parents' wishes, went, became director. I mean, she was on fire at being the best and the youngest. And then God convicted her one day. Like people kept pursuing her. And then one day she saw an ultrasound, saw what she did, and she left. And to me, it's a modern day Saul to Paul experience is
Mm-hmm.
she became the driving force that led to Roe versus Wade being overturned. It would not have overturned without her. And like how incredible is that? Is that wasn't a story of her being perfect. It was a story of her repenting, honestly. Very publicly repenting and that leading to the salvation of many. There's a scripture that says you intended for evil, God intended for the saving of many. And so,
Genesis 50, that's right.
yep, it's just like the Chuck Colson story. It's like this is how it started, but now God's got the full glory because of repentance, honestly.
And only God can rewrite a story.
I agree. I love that. So I wanted to ask if you were talking to someone who was a younger version of yourself, just getting started in teaching, having all these hopes and dreams, how would you encourage her right now?
Beautiful question. I would say to not buy into the lie, like we've been saying, that you have to be perfect or that you have to have the same milestones that everyone else has by a certain time, but to continue to walk to the beat of not your own drum, of God's drum for you, of the song that He wrote that is your life, and to know that every season matters, even the seasons that we hate and we are frustrated and we're confused and we vulnerably question God and say, why is it like this right now? And I would encourage her to feel it, don't bottle it up, but to bring it to God and say, okay, what do you want me to do with this? How can I honor you with this? What's the next best thing to do? Because I think if we're asking God what's the next best thing to do, we'll be surprised sometimes with the answer, but I think we also look at it that He's the only one that knows what the next best thing really is to do.
I love that advice. And you were talking about still making space for your feelings, not staying there in them, but making space for them. And that reminds me of a role I have with a friend who is similar to me, who's like, let's avoid feelings. That for me is not a trail I normally go down. And so we made a rule 24 hours, something horrible happens, 24 hours to mope, just mope, to be angry, whatever, and you set that time and you fill it, and then later on you're not dealing with this deeper despair because you've taken the time
That's
to
right.
to make space for the morning and then make space for the new.
That's right. I have the same, I call it chump time. And I actually have a whole exercise in my last book of how to properly have time. But to allow yourself to have that, because if you do that, one, you can say you did it, but two, it gives you the opportunity to feel it out and to get it out. And so it doesn't ferment into this horrible bitter ale that just exists in you.
I love that. And I love that you've written about that. So that's a good plug for your book. And I feel like we've talked about a lot of heavy things. So I just want to ask you two lighter questions before we close. Like,
Deal.
what is your favorite thing to do for fun?
Oh, that's fun. I really love woodworking. I know that's such a quirky thing for a school teacher in her 30s to do, but I love woodworking and it's one of my favorite things to do with my dad. So it's one of our hobbies.
That's really cool. What's the neatest thing you've ever made?
Oh man. Tree shelves. So they're like tree round shelves and they have exposed bark, but I love working with cedar and so I made the bark so that it's preserved. And so it kind of feel like you're living in like a tree house.
Oh, that sounds incredible. That is a fun hobby.
It is a fun hobby.
And then my other question is, I feel like you would have a really unique favorite verse with you talking about reading the Bible in middle school. What has been your favorite verse throughout the years?
I have so many. I feel like it goes from season to season, but I think probably I know it's a coffee mug verse, but Ephesians 3:16 through 20, where it talks about being established in Christ, but it grows into that he can go exceedingly and abundantly more than all we could ask for or imagine. And as somebody who has a profound curiosity sense and a pretty healthy imagination, I love acknowledging that God can very much outdo me, and I love when he does it.
Same, and I really appreciate that you have made it the 16 to 20. I think it's important that you talked about it's established in God. And then
You gotta have those tree roots. That's
yeah,
part one.
yeah, I really love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight, Callie.
Thank you so much. It's been so beautiful to share time with you, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great night.
You too.